Well, good afternoon, class. Welcome to Soil University. Give me a 5x5 if you can hear me clearly and plainly, and if the music is too loud against the audio of my voice. Give me a 1 if you don't want the music, a 2 if you do want the background music. I probably will shut it off while I talk about some of the more in-depth details, but just let me know that you can actually hear me out there. Thank you, Mr. Sapphire. Good to see you. Hopkinson, Charlotte Williams. No worries, Tanya. I'm still technically open for business myself, but it's the afternoon, so should be dying down here. May have an interruption here or there, we'll have to see. And this for sure won't go any longer than probably 6:30 at the most. So, I'll cover as much material and try and answer as many questions as I can. But you all are in for some inside baseball on how all these messages that the U.S. Air Force transmits on a daily basis, how that works out. What's the whole big spiel about it? What's the big deal about even listening to them or monitoring them or even paying attention to them? Where does it all fit? Why does it have an excitement factor? What does it mean? What do they do? Are they really ordering lunch or launching missiles? What are they doing? So I'm going to cover all that. To the best extent of my knowledge, we are brushing up in a topic that also has current classified information on operations and procedures. So there's only so much that we can pull out of the murky water, so to speak. I'm asking too many questions. Don't worry, we're going to start with an overview, Shar. We're going to start with the basics and then build on that foundation. Probably going to make some people mad. Demystifying topics usually does. We're going to be kicking the can full of trade secrets and things of that nature. We're going to be busting some myths. I think there's probably a pretty good crowd in here now, so I'll just go ahead and start. Let's just get rid of the music for now. How about that? And we're going to turn on the radio audio. Okay, that static is a East Coast station. EAMs have been somewhat active today, so we might get some live examples in here as well. But for current intents and purposes, they're not really needed. But it'll be on in the background. Okay. Welcome to Soil University, Radio University. We are going to cover today the HF-GCS system and EAMs. What is HF-GCS? HF colon or space, whatever you want to call it, GCS. High Frequency Global Command System. It's the U.S. Air Force radio system, high-frequency radio system for transmitting messages, not just EAMs, but also for transmitting net control, net links, and basically what HF-GCS is a series of frequencies, a list of frequencies, okay, in the high-frequency radio spectrum. And there are several stations, land stations, that are control nodes all over the globe. And we hear them in radio checks and things of that nature. You hear them announce themselves. You hear call signs. You hear all kinds of stuff. We're going to go through all that. Okay? What these entities are, what they're doing, why they're doing it, what does it mean most of the time. Okay? So sit back, relax, and I will guide you through what is truly known without a bunch of hype or, using it for entertainment purposes, which, let's be honest, a lot of channels do. I've guided other channels, not just probably the ones that, the one that you guys are thinking of, but I've been involved in helping creators on different platforms in the background, announced and unannounced, known and unknown, and have helped guide them to be able to integrate high-frequency radio monitoring on their channels. Some channels I've helped them build their own shortwave listening stations so they can pick this up, without using internet bandwidth, or just to be able to monitor standalone, things of that nature, okay? So I've been in, I've never myself personally sent an EAM. I can't claim that, all right? I've never been a member of the U.S. military, enlisted or officer corps, can't claim that, okay? Just for full transparency and disclosure, okay? Never been a member of the military, all right? Now, does this mean you can't learn about these systems, understand them to a certain extent on what's been declassified, unclassified, understand how they operate, why they operate? No, you don't. There's plenty of members of the military, if you were to ask them, what are these things? They wouldn't be able to tell you. I know, because I've met oodles and dozens and bucketfuls of U.S. military members that have no clue what the system does, no clue what it's for. And why don't they know? Well, it's real simple. It wasn't in their job description. It wasn't part of their function, their MOS, their job. Okay? So only certain segments of the military themselves even know what these systems are, and even lesser percentage of military members are involved in the operation, day-to-day operation of these systems. Okay? So let's dispel myth number one. You have to be some kind of secret squirrel military insider or contractor to have any authority or knowledge of these systems. Nope. Nope, you don't. Okay? So we're going to learn together. And just the sheer volume of pages that I have up to bounce around on this topic shows you how much information there is out there. And this is only the tip of the iceberg of what you, if you're dedicated and you want to find out about these systems on your own, okay, that's available out there. You will run into brick walls when it comes to classified manuals and operations procedures, standard operating procedures, stuff like that. You will run into those brick walls, and I'll show you an example of that in the material coming up. But there's a lot to be learned and gleaned from the information that's already out there. And typically what happens in the OSINT bro spaces, live geopolitical or Milcom news coverage spaces, is they use EAMs and they use the reception and broadcast of these messages as some type of mystery soup to add to the buffet of what their channel or content might offer. And it's very common to do so, to add this kind of, monitoring to your OSINT dashboard. One, because there is a value to monitoring these communications. There's no doubt about that. But it's not well understood. Radio operations by itself is not well understood by the masses. So, it's a very tempting menu item to add to wow people. Okay? And, you can get into the ethics of that, but let's face it, on social media, on different channels and things like that, you need to have some kind of wow factor. You need to have some kind of splashy thumbnail. You need to, lift the curtain a little bit on super secret squirrel insider military, information, and you can dress it up how you want, because no one can definitively come back to you and say, this message that you just claimed is for X is false. It's actually for Y. Why can't you do that? Because the cryptology is classified. No one knows what that message is except for the senders and the recipients, and the middlemen of most EAMs have no clue what they are. They're just passing messages. And we're going to look at, as well, one of the tabs I have is for the actual, it's like the training outline or educational outline that the U.S. Air Force has put out, in a bulletin style on the exact job a U.S. Air Force, crewman or radio operator, whatever you want to call them, basically the U.S. Air Force MOS equivalent, if you're talking like Army, job descriptions, of what's expected and what are the tiers of training and where that puts you in the command post. So that tells you things by itself when you're trying to figure out systems that are highly classified. So on the desktop currently, in your view, what you can see is I've got one East Coast station, SDR station, through the internet on one of the primary frequencies of HF-GCS, 11175. When you go to a channel or a creator that is usually monitoring these, they're going to monitor only the primary channels. And as far as a little HF radio knowledge for you guys, using one small station, like an SDR station, which is a private individual's radio receiving station, many times different ground stations and different air assets, or different assets, I shouldn't say just air because it's not just airframes, will broadcast EAMs, will broadcast traffic, messages, net check-ins, of the like on high-frequency radio all around the world at any given time. However, the propagation, okay, the way the high-frequency transmission and reception of messages using the high-frequency band, okay, it's dependent upon the atmosphere, the Earth's ionosphere, not the atmosphere, the Earth's ionosphere in order to propagate. So it can bounce to places that, you might be listening at the time. It can bounce over you. It can bounce away from you to where there's an EAM, very high priority, super important, scream level EAM. And if you're listening at one specific station, you might not hear it because it was broadcast out of the UK or out of Sigonella in Italy or out of Yokota in Japan. And that particular station may not reach where your ear is at, so to speak. So keep in mind too, when you're watching channels or watching a creator that is monitoring, quote unquote, monitoring EAMs, you're only listening to one frequency or maybe two, and only one geographical area or maybe two. The better ones that have this in their dashboard are going to listen to the primary frequencies, which is 11175, okay, and 8, 9, or 9 or 2, and they're going to try and listen to them in the CONUS, continental United States, the station there, and they're also going to try and listen to them usually out of 20, which is a iconic SDR station in the Netherlands, and that's geographical point number 2, and you'll catch, monitoring in that way, you'll catch 70 to 80% of the traffic, strong traffic on HF-GCS. So, yeah, I'm seeing Charlotte's putting, there was 120 character, 124, 248 characters, a 41 character EAM when Trump landed in DC this morning. Okay, let me dispel another myth, number 2. The function, and thanks for that report, Char. I'm not picking on you when I divulge this next information, but just for your own FYI. HF-GCS, high frequency radio transmissions, when EAMs are transmitted, that is a function of one of two things: NC2 or NC3 classified transmissions. And we're going to get into what NC2 and NC3 is, but basically it's nuclear command and control levels, strategic level communications. So keep in mind, when you see or you're anticipating a particular geopolitical event or a particular set of events happen in the news that you can track, and you hear emergency action messages or other traffic at the same time, that is correlation reasoning and not causation reasoning. What that means is these things can be separate and unrelated. So if something major looks like it's about ready to happen, like invasion by a military force into another country, and you hear a whole bunch of EAMs, it's speculation at best to say, well, I heard a such and such character EAM, and this is going on in the world, so that EAM equals some kind of information to our forces for that event. That's not true. Okay? And a lot of the OSINT bros, live news, the 24/7 monitoring channels and things like that, want to tie those two things. They want that menu item, that magic soup, to mean, oh, look, what we're watching here is, look at this correlation. Oh my gosh, something's, breaking news, something's about to happen. In reality, though, there's no way to determine that. It's a causal, it's a correlation relationship, not a causal relationship. And typically when these messages are being passed, and there's one going on right now, but I'm not going to stop everything I'm doing, turn the audio up on the radio, because these happen every day. Okay? So the fact that Air Force One is landing somewhere, and then there's non-typical count EAMs happening at the same time, does not indicate that something's quote-unquote going on. All right, does that make sense with everybody? So on other channels, and here's some more insider baseball. Other channels that I've helped, more than just one. Okay, I'm not talking about one particular channel or one particular creator here. Before I was heavily involved in the NYP space, helping Greg, I had helped and continue to help a multitude of other channels. Some don't want it to be known that I helped them or am involved with their channel. Okay? And some do. Many of you are from a channel that wanted it to be known I was in the background actively helping. And that's cool. But there's plenty of other spaces that the only reason their audience is here, EAMs in the first place, is because I've lent a hand, right, on receiving them, gave them an overview, the creator, of what they are, what they truly are. No BS hype or any of that kind of stuff. And then they decided for their own menus, for their own audiences, what they want EAMs to be in their space, in their channel. Do they want it to be just a data point? Matter of fact, yep, we had X number of EAMs, we had X number of 30 characters, X number of odd characters, yada, yada, yada. And someone's saying I'm breaking up. Is my audio okay? Give me a second request for a 5x5. And I'm going to mute the radio now just to test my audio. Okay, no problem here. So you might want to refresh your feed. Who it was that said I was breaking up in there. I just saw it out of the corner of my eye. But anyway, my point is, on the menu, they can decide, oh, this is super important breaking news, or it's just a data point. It's just one of the things that they monitor, like flights or other things. And that's cool. And the hard part for me in the past has been, okay, I've got to remember how this creator wanted their audience, to what amount of stock and urgency and wow factor does the creator want for their particular audience regarding EAMs. So you be a good moderator or a good friend of a channel, and you try and shape that for that particular channel. This is my channel. This is Soil University, so I'm going to give it to you straight, no hype, no BS, no wow factor, no menu item, just what I know about this particular mode of communication. So if you're here, great, but just keep in mind, you go back to other channels, you're going to get an adverse reaction if that particular channel or creator wants a certain wow factor associated with what they monitor. And keep in mind, it's not easy to monitor these things without setting up, either a dedicated radio reception station, right? Or devoting bandwidth to keeping more than one, SDR feed open in your browser and also stream and all that. So, it does take quite a bit of work to, present live HF monitoring to folks. So, thank you for the 5x5s. I'm glad you got that figured out, Beth. I think somebody was listening to me in 1.5 speed. Yeah. Okay, so let's start. Class is in session. Let me take a swig here real quick. All right, let's start. HF-GCS, emergency action messages. How are they sent out? What are they? Let's start at the department level. On my desktop here, what's displayed on your screen, okay, is the webpage for the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center. Okay, it's their front page. They're integrated into, obviously, like their name suggests, the handling of nuclear weapons and all its aspects for the U.S. Armed Forces. All right? So you look at weapons in one column, land-based nuclear capabilities in another column, missile silos, space, what's now, kind of integrated into Space Force operations as well, ICBMs. The only part of the, there's an integration level because you also have to deal with the U.S. Navy for the other leg of the triad, which is the submarine fleet and all that kind of stuff. And so you're going to have some U.S. Navy integration in there too. And a lot of times when you hear the communications, like from the E6 airborne platforms, that's the U.S. Navy on their TACAMO mission. That falls under the United States Navy to operate the E6, quote unquote doomsday planes and all that kind of stuff. The U.S. Air Force operates the E4 Night Watch and a lot of the nuclear weapon delivery platforms and airframes. That's U.S. Air Force. So just for simplicity's sake, for diving into what the communications are, we're going to look at the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center. So look at the third column there from the left, Nuclear Command and Control Communications. All right? It's one of the things they do. And they have bulleted points on that particular system. But one thing that you notice pretty quickly, okay, not that it's, it's just an interesting point to note, is you can go to these other columns and click on them, and it'll take you to information about those particular weapon systems, different information, things like that. There is nothing that is highlighted that will take you anywhere under the Nuclear Command and Control Communications. They do you the favor of listing some of the platforms, some of the bulleted points of what they do. Otherwise, it would look odd to have an empty column there. But it's very interesting that you can't go anywhere under common very low frequency receivers, the FABITs, the Global Air Crew Strategic Network Terminals, the NC3 weapon systems, presidential and national level voice conferencing. It doesn't take you anywhere because all those programs have highly classified elements associated to them for procedures, equipment, technology used, all that kind of stuff. So yes, it's like saying, yes, we do it, but we're not going to say anything more about that. And the reasons are obvious. You don't want a foreign actor or a domestic non-associated actor to be able to interfere with something as important as nuclear weapon command and control. I mean, that's just obvious. So, yeah. All right, but the clues that they leave here, what are some of them? And what does it have to do with communication and EAMs and HF-GCS and all that jazz? Well, where I would start for an overarching view is NC3 weapon system AN-USQ.225. That's where I would start. The other stuff is just different modes. These modes are wrapped up, from my own knowledge. I understand that a lot of these other modes fall under this NC3 weapon system, AN-USQ.225. And what that NC3 weapon system is, and we'll go into a little bit, is basically it's the overarching system of systems for nuclear command and control communications. Okay? Does that make sense? It's listed as a weapon system, but it's actually a big pile of systems over other systems, all in comms. Okay? So, Let's see if I can go in the right order here. What you have to do if you want to nerd out on this stuff and really figure out what is going on in the grand scheme of things, what you're hearing, what you're listening to, you have to sit down and read a ton of information and go through it step by step and jump by jump, and every once in a while you're going to hit your head on a classified brick wall, and you're going to have more questions than answers when you're done. But we're going to demystify it. That's the purpose of this live stream, is we're going to try and demystify some of this stuff. All right, so you have to be a huge dork and go to U.S. Air Force or U.S. Navy doctrine or Joint Command doctrine and read through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of dry descriptions and acronyms to get an idea of what's going on. So I'm going to try and boil it down, simplify it as best that I can. Okay? And yes, I know that there are currently right now EAMs and other traffic on HF-GCS, but it's not important to integrate into the lesson plan at this current time. So if the local military base closest to you hasn't reached 3 times the temperature of the sun, you can ignore it for now. Okay? I have been hearing EAMs of all sorts for probably close to 20 years, and not one time after a day of incredible EAM broadcasts has a nuclear device gone off in anger anywhere in the world that I'm aware of. So we can ignore it for now, rest assured. And that's probably Murphy's Law. Today will probably be the day that the balloon drops while I'm purposefully ignoring EAM traffic. That's just how Murphy's Law and luck works. But we'll see. Okay. Here's U.S. Air Force doctrine to give you an idea. This whole graph is all manuals. Joint service doctrines, tactical doctrines. A lot of this stuff has got restricted access, but let's try and simplify it. Where do we want to start? Let's start with a definition of what NC2 and NC3 is, because that's important to know right out of the gate. Okay. I think I had a better document than that. Okay. Nuclear command and control systems. All right. So when you hear an EAM, what you're hearing is only a small segment of the overall NC3 system. So you go onto your favorite YouTube channel, your favorite monitor, you're doing Milcom monitoring yourself, and you're in the high frequency band space, right, from 0 to 30 megahertz. And you go on to one of the, you tune in to one of the primary channels that's broadcast on HF, and you hear these alphanumeric cryptic communications. Know that you are only hearing one small slice of what the NC2 and NC3 system is broadcasting at any given time. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that. But the NC3 system is the means through which presidential authority is exercised and operational command and control of nuclear operations is conducted. The NC3 system is part of the larger National Leadership Command Capability, the NLCC, which encompasses the 3 broad mission areas of presidential and senior leader communications. NC3 is listed as point 2, so the NC3 system is integrated and part of a broad mission area of just NC3. That's not purposeful military circular reasoning, but it's like a system that supports a system. And 3, continuity of operations and continuity of government communications. Sources for that statement is PPD-35 and DODI-S-3730.01 Nuclear Command, Control, and Communications NC3 system. See sources for the full classified definition. Well, obviously we can't do that. And if you do try and look for something like that, okay, you end up as a civilian without access to controlled systems with this. DoD Instruction S-37301, Nuclear Command and Control Communication Systems, November 6, 2015. Even the change is, this is a controlled document. This website is not authorized to post controlled documents. Authorized users may obtain a copy on SIPRNet, and we'll talk a little bit about what SIPR and NIPRNet is. They're sending the black Suburbans to your house to throw you in a sack and beat you with clubs. So, Tracy, then why even bother? I will get to that. Okay, there is a reason to monitor these communications. They are data points. They are what's called proof of life transmissions, things of that nature. But if you're feeling deflated, okay, it's just because I'm taking a little bit of the magic out of the soup. So don't feel deflated. You were taken to Disney World in some instances by some creators. That might generate some hate, but that's what it is. Okay? So it's a small snippet of everything else going on. So this document, or this picture here, is from published Air Force Doctrine, Publication 3-0.1, Command and Control, direct from the Air Force. I think it's the same document. I can have so many documents open. But anyway, high frequency is part of an overarching term, the electromagnetic spectrum. So radio signals, radar, science and technology, anything that is an electronic, electromagnetic, man-made, and in some cases naturally made emission of energetic particles is in the electromagnetic spectrum. High frequency is a small sliver. It's a small range, 0 to 30 megahertz, of the electromagnetic spectrum. When we listen to the primary or secondary HF-GCS stations, it's one even smaller sliver of that range. So if you look at this graphic, you can see DoD electromagnetic spectrum use. Look at all the different aspects of what encompasses EM spectrum usage. It's interesting in this figure that the term HF-GCS isn't really incorporated with anything. Probably because it's lumped in or integrated with civil networks. Probably because once you broadcast it, anyone can hear it. All right, but look at all the different aspects, communication-wise, in the EM spectrum. Obviously, they put defense meteorological satellite programs, a GPS system. And here's an interesting side note about the GPS system. Many people know it started as a military platform, But the GPS satellites themselves, in the layers of their communication capabilities, has a defined NC3 nuclear command and control role. And I can't say much more than that, but your Garmin is working and telling you where you're at on the surface of the Earth, but those same satellite network that does that also has other capabilities, which include capabilities that aid the United States nuclear program. And they are a layer that you don't see or you don't interact with. And the same goes for a lot of commercial satellites. Satellites that might bring you pay-per-view have a separate and, contained layer through security protocol, software, things like that, that will function for military usage. And you're watching the soccer game or the fight on one side of the satellite's capability, and in another part of the satellite's capability, there's messages and information and data being passed for military usage. So you've got global positioning system, protected SATCOM, wideband SATCOM, narrowband SATCOM. Do you think in this day and age, let me pose a question to the class, in this day and age, when even a older technology airframe like a B-52 is carrying out some sort of nuclear command and control mission, or even, a deployment mission, weapons deployment mission, one of the, which avenue of communication is likely predominant in their normal routine of activities? Is it high frequency, or is it going to be SATCOM? As far as OPSEC goes and COMSEC goes, what do you think they're really using in a minute-by-minute mission basis? As long as it's not during a time of war where the satellites are actually being shot out of the sky or anything like that, but it's just a Wednesday or a Thursday evening, you're listening to your favorite monitoring channel, okay, and there's silence. Does that mean that there's nothing going on? That there's not missions being, conducted in that time? Sure, maybe, but at the same time, there likely is dozens of missions taking place, for both show of force, deterrence, exercises, things of that nature that requires active communication, but you're not hearing it on HF because it's primarily taking place on secure satellite frequencies, which is a different slice of the EM band plan. So, what's the point of this micro lesson, this little subset here? HF, high frequency radio terrestrial communication, is one teeny tiny little part of the overall communications strategy, not only of the military, but also of NC3 and NC2 control networks. Okay, so let's go back and talk a little bit more about NC3 systems. The NC3 system refers to the, quote, means through which presidential authority is exercised and operational C2 of nuclear operations is conducted. The NC3 system is part of the larger NLCC, which encompasses the broad mission areas, blah, blah, blah. I've read that to you already, but it's important to note the first word of that quote. The NC3 system refers to the means, not the NC3 system is 11175 in the HF band space. The means. That's anything that's very low frequency. That's VHF, UHF, HF, SUHF, SATCOM frequencies. That could be friggin' smoke signals. That can be Morse code in Navajo. It's the means. Okay? Everyone got that? Is that clear as mud? Nuclear command and control communications is any way, okay, a letter on horseback written by a quill pen from the president to the Joint Chiefs of Staff can be considered NC3. Hopefully situations don't ever get to that point, because, you know, that's probably way past Armageddon time. But it's the means. Okay. The only reason I beat that point is because you will, if you go around the block enough, you will find creators that will say this handful of frequencies in the HF spectrum is the only way, in the complex technology that we have available to us through the U.S. military, that's the only way this or that gets launched, or this or that takes off, or, if you hear Skymaster, oh my gosh, that means the end is nigh. All right, it's not. It's one, you're hearing messages being passed in a certain format, a predetermined format, in one little sliver of the NC3 communications profile. Okie dokie. Okie dokie. I just saw a really powerful signal on the waterfall here, so let's see what the squawking is. And then we'll go into what the other means could possibly be that's utilized that you don't hear and you may not even know exist. But some of you watching the waterfall might have, I seen that signal right there, and I'm like, what's going on?
Mainsail, this is squad car on 11175. How copy my station, over?
Sounds like they're getting ready to do a net check-in or check-out.
Squad car, this is mainsail, please stand by 5 mic, over.
What are they talking about? I'll give them a minute to squawk, see if they squawk anything worth listening to. Squelch it just so you don't have to hear nonstop static.
Message follows. 3. Call. Zulu. Yankee. X-ray. 3. Tango. Charlie. 5. X-ray. Quebec. Oscar. 6. Papa. Juliet. 3. Quebec. Foxtrot. Victor. Mike. Delta. Kilo. November. 2. Romeo. Hotel. Sierra. Golf. Bravo. Zulu. I say again. 3. Golf. Zulu. Yankee. X-ray. 3. Tango. Charlie. 5. X-ray. Quebec. Oscar. 6. Papa. Juliet. 3. Quebec. Foxtrot. Victor. Mike. Delta. Kilo. November. 2. Romeo. Hotel. Sierra. Golf. Bravo. Zulu. This is sellout. Out.
Okay, I actually walked out of the station, shut something off, grabbed another drink. That's how important it was for me to monitor or hear that 30-character EAM just now from call sign sellout. If you heard it once, you've heard it 1,000 times. What does that particular message mean? Well, now there's more traffic. Do I turn? Yeah, he sounded nervous. Dude doesn't even know what he's passing on, more than likely. And that's what we're going to cover here shortly. But first, let's start at a top-level view so you guys can see, all right, how many systems are integrated and actually carry this kind of traffic. The same status level or importance level that this particular EAM might or might not be. You know, you're only hearing one mode. Okay? So remember the NC3 weapon system that I introduced you to earlier in class. What is that? It's a system of systems. I've got El Graco pulled up here, okay, to kind of help us sort through it a little bit. But let's go through. He does give a key facts here, designation and governance. 2016 is an important year in formalizing NC3 elements. That was during the Obama term. It changed. It kind of, the command structure changed a little bit. Not really important in the scope of what we're trying to cover today. Joel Beard 341. It's not a dumb question. There's no dumb questions here or dumb observations or conclusions. Is there any significance to the character size with an EAM? Yes, there is. There is a significance with character count in the message. But what that significance is and always has been classified. What I can tell you from my own observations over years of monitoring, my own nerd behaviors by touring missile sites and talking to retired missile operators and having many, many conversations with people that had once operated classified systems or utilized classified methods is there is significance to the length, and it's twofold. And this is I'm kind of coming to a topic earlier than I wanted to, but I'll just throw it out here since you asked the question. You have to listen to each individual message, okay, for one of the aspects. And one of those aspects might be built into, how can I say this without diving into even further, like the methods of cryptology rabbit holes, but let me just throw it out there and we can expand on it later, I guess. In cryptology, there's always some weak points. One of them is, how do you, in a rolling cryptographic chain, which is what the EAM alphanumeric characters are, they're reassigned sometimes hourly, daily, for sure weekly, all that kind of stuff. How do you denote a break without having the same set of characters? Because breaks are common in communications. It's kind of like if you think back to the machine, I'm trying to remember the guy's name in World War II. Is it Alan Turing, I think? Alan Turing basically built a machine, an early version of a computer, to break the German Enigma code messages. And one of the avenues that they used to break the Enigma code, standalone, A, they had to get their hands on an Enigma. B, they had to get all kinds of data and observations of the signals. But in the story, what actually happened was there was a common point in all German messages, radio messages at the time, and that was Heil Hitler. So they knew in every message, cryptographic message through the Enigma communications encoding sequence, that those character sets in that order were going to be in there somewhere. And I think that was also a main plot point to the movie about Alan Turing and the Enigma and all that kind of stuff. But that's an example of how you can have kind of a weak point in the armor in a cryptographic sequence or procedure. And it's the same with us. You need punctuation, you need line breaks in messages. Otherwise, it's just one big run-on thingy, And when you're doing voice one-time pad cryptology, like an EAM message, there has to be breaks. So you have to listen in the message itself. Is there a duplicate, triplicate, quad, or other, meaning they're reading off these characters, and you can hear this in real time if you monitor EAMs. They're reading off the character set, and they'll get to a certain point in the message, and it will be, say, for example, a triplicate. Bravo, bravo, bravo. Or whiskey, whiskey, whiskey. Typically, that's considered probably a break, meaning they're breaking up bodies of the messages. Okay, so that's one aspect. So you can have a quote-unquote 30-character message or a 41-character message, but if there's breaks in there, or triplicates, duplicates, quads, and a quad being 4 characters, obviously, well, that's no longer a 30-character or 41-character message. Now it's a body, and you have limited information on what is the header, what are the check digits, what are the basically the string series that is the authenticator. That might get changed. That might be 4 characters or 6 characters, anything like that. So you really don't know. But my point is you can have a really, really long message, and if they're full of triplicates or quads, you might have a message to, read off at one time in one big block body, and it's to multiple station prefixes or call signs, right? And it's separated by those breaks. in the conversations I've had with actual like retired military members that were involved with this, is that's kind of the consensus that I came away with. You know, they understand that until they go to their graves, they were working with classified systems, and there's only so much they can really tell you about the story and the operation. And believe me, their hairs on the back of their neck and their antennas go up and their shields go up really quick when you start asking those kinds of questions, because there's only so much they're at liberty to really say. Okay, so that's point one. Is it really the character count that you think it is, based on that? And two, also talking to the same personnel when I've been down in missile silos doing tours. You know, some of the old Cold War missile silos are now basically National Historic Landmarks and under the care of the Department of the Interior, National Park System. And they give tours, and there's old logbooks in there, and you know, the old wax paper overlays or the film overlays where they would, you know, the missileers would actually write down the EAMs, and then as they heard it over the loudspeaker, and then read it to their, you know, compatriot in the missile silo for verification, swap folders, things of that nature. From what I've gathered there, the shorter the message, like 20 characters or less, the less you really want to hear that message. So the order to quote unquote launch missiles is probably not going to be a 165 character message. It's going to be a 15 or a 17 or a 13 character message, because once those missiles are let go, there's no recall. I mean, maybe they've got technology for destruct in transit, destruct in flight, something like that. But by and large, if you need to get something off the ground and on the way to a target, you're not going to do it by reading off 145 characters. You're going to read off 13. You know, a little bit of common sense applied toward the cryptology there. But in the same vein, can you have a long message string that is broadcast and intended for multiple silos, and they're full of triplicates and quads, and they're actually all 13 or 15 or 17? Sure, you could have that. That's very possible. But are you even going to hear that order over the HF frequencies would be the question, and that's why I'm getting ready to dive into expanding on this NC3 weapons system AN-USQ-225. Because more than likely, when it comes to actually the balloon going up and seeing Trident missiles screaming toward targets in the sky, you'll probably not hear that over HF first. Maybe you will hear corresponding waves if you're not in the blast radius of the return ordnance coming in, and it's the second, third waves after satellites have been, you know, massively taken out by near peer that we're sending our love to at the time. But it's important to know about these other systems. I'm just scanning the chat, see if anybody's really getting out of pocket. Doesn't look like it. Looks like everybody's doing okay. Okay, so hopefully, Joel, that answers your question. It's a lot of times there's no easy answers. Okay, all right. So let's dive into where these messages are actually being sent over, because if HF-GCS, what we can monitor, is only a small snippet, what are the actual other systems that we're talking about? And here's from El Graco here, major components and related systems of the AN-USQ-225 system of systems. Global Aircrew Strategic Network Terminal, or gasnet. So that is a computer in an airframe, bomber, a fighter, whatever, that's nuclear weapons capable, right? That will access the NC3 system. Is the NC3 system just HF radio? Nope. Remember earlier in class, satellites, other terrestrial communications, it can be UHF point to point, it can be a number of different things. So that network terminal is exactly as it sounds. It's a terminal into a network where emergency action messages and other orders can flow, clarification or confirmation can be requested, things of that network, things of that nature. That's just one. Then we've got another terminal, secure, anti-jam, reliable tactical terminal. Probably does exactly like it sounds. Highly classified piece of equipment. You're probably never even going to see a picture of that. Same with, much operating knowledge of the Global Aircrew Strategic Network Terminal. You're probably not going to find any information on that online in the free space, and even FOIA for asking about these two things will probably get you on a list. Your FOIA will be rejected. The black Suburbans will come. They'll put you in a gunny sack and beat you with clubs and take your lunch money if you push it too far. Family of advanced beyond light line of sight terminals, FAB-Ts. Well, it's a family, so it's more than one system, obviously. Beyond line of sight, well, what is high frequency radio? High frequency radio is beyond line of sight communications because it uses ionic spheric propagation. So that's the magic of HF radio, unlike your FM station in your car, your satellite station, right, where the transmitter's up in space, moving at hundreds of meters per second, and you're on the ground. You're also moving at hundreds of meters per second, but you've evolved not to notice, really. Satellite communication is still line of sight. So there's only so many techniques or modes of radio communication that is beyond line of sight, and high frequencies or high frequency signals is one of those. So it's possible that when you're hearing an EAM over a Kiwi SDR or an SDR radio or your own ham radio, shortwave radio, whatever, you're hearing one of the broadcasts to just one of the methods in the family of advanced beyond line of sight terminals. Okay, FAB-Ts. That was personally, that's where I would stick HF radio communications, would be that terminal, just based on its description. Advanced extremely high frequency satellite communications, AEHF. Advanced extremely high frequency. So that is in your nanometer wavelengths. That is probably bordering on not juice box space lasers, but like real communication, point to point, extremely high frequency. That can still be, what you consider UHF or SUHF. It's just a really high frequency, really narrow, small bandwidth, measured in the width of, more than likely nanometers, which when you get that small of a wavelength, right, you're getting into laser territory. So not juice box space lasers, but actual real technology that is laser-like communication that comes from a satellite. Highly integrated software and hardware needed for those kind of communication systems because the accuracy of the transmitted signal has to fall within, basically within a meter. So extremely accurate concentration of electromagnetic energy, right? And that does exist. It does exist. And where do they go to? What units have these terminals or this equipment is various command posts, fixed, mobile, airborne like the E-4B, receivers, and links to nuclear-capable forces, right? So you're on the ground, in the ocean, in the air, and your civilian control like Air Force One, the E-4B Night Watch, which is, one aspect of the NC-3 system. So that whole plane, that whole airframe, and all the technology and all the human operators aboard it is one aspect of the NC-3 communication system. Okay. And I had asked El Graco, background modernization prior to designation as a weapon system. Yeah, that was some of the changes in 2015, 2016 that I was talking about. The NC-3 responsibilities were too fragmented. So they did a stand-up of NC-3 integration directorate in 2015, and now you have disciplined engineering, baseline performance criteria, stakeholder coordination, across DoD, services, national levels. Modernization focuses on resilience against hypersonic weapons. Okay, so they up the speed of comm time. Counter space threats, which is satellite destruction or jamming. Cyber attacks, which the military has their own internet. Okay, and that's the Nipper and Sipper nets, which I'll cover a little bit later. But that's their secure internet. And EMP effects. So it's an active nuclear conflict. There's EMP radiation taking place, and certain kind of comms can't get through that. So you need this layering, and what you see on the right-hand side of the screen here is just one strata of those layers of comm systems. Okay, and they all need to work together, and they need to be redundant and overlapping. So when the president calls that, hey, I want to light up Kazakhstan, because they didn't tell me that I was great and wonderful and I've got the perfect shade of orange today, he can do that. He's going to get in trouble later, but, that's the example, okay, just for example. And supports broader nuclear triad upgrades. Do always, anywhere presidential control. Yeah. So, like I said, I had asked El Graco earlier, how does EAMs tie into this weapon system, which is a system of system? And it's through command post and supports base level systems like Giant Voice for mass notification. Grok didn't really know what to answer here. I can tell by El Graco's answer. And it's because a lot of stuff is classified. He didn't have enough material for the LLM, the language learning model, to really pull from. So he kind of had to throw something out there. Giant Voice is not a classified system. That's the on-base or on-premises loudspeaker notification system. I think it's loudspeaker, SMS text, and I think it's only Nipper. I don't think they have Giant Voice into the SIPRnet. But it's basically just a personnel warning messaging system that's on bases and installations. So for whatever reason, El Graco, in his confusion, pulled out Giant Voice to highlight. But there is truth to that too, because an EAM can result in a force direction measure, which then would trickle down to a system like Giant Voice, alerting the staff that they're now at a different force protection status, or they're now engaged in an operation, similar to screaming battle stations, I guess, is one way to put it. All right, let me stop there. Now that we've covered NC3 and NC2, and we've covered the system of systems, and we've covered the department level, right? Department level of at least the U.S. Air Force, where we're at there. Before I go any further with any of this other stuff, Does anyone have any questions? Okay. We started at the department level and we worked our way down a little bit some in understanding. Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center, NC2, NC3 communications, what that is. Let me bring that highlighted portion back. Anybody have any questions that they want to ask? We're an hour, 20 minutes into the live stream. Give it some time for any questions to come up. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Anybody? Ramjet. Would a heavy volume of EAMs back-to-back signal really anything? Yes. Heavy EAM traffic back-to-back signals to you that there's a heavy volume of traffic. You may not know those could all be stand-down messages from a previous declared force direction level. You know, it's a good question. I'm not making fun of it or anything like that. But, if you have a heavy volume, since it's secured communication and it's cryptology, you don't know what that heavy volume is signifying. And you jump into causation and correlation territory when you say, oh my gosh, this is going on in this corner of the world, it looks imminent, and we had a heavy volume of EAM messages. Are they related? Possibly, but in what way are they related? You know, are they truly updating targeting? Are they changing force readiness and force direction statures for different units involved there? All you know during a heavy flow day, so to speak, of EAMs is there's a lot of activity for some reason, but because of what we know of the system, it's strategic level, which you're not going to get an EAM, okay, so to speak, for a squad of Army dudes in green on the ground. You know, they're not going to use an emergency action message to tell a squad level or even a battalion level to commence their operations. That's going to happen through other networks of military communications that you don't have access to because it's going to be satellite, and it's going to be encrypted satellite. Okay? So when you hear an EAM over HF, whatever that message is, it's meant for the strategic level domain. And you can, believe it or not, you can invade an entire nation, a foreign nation, and not bounce against strategic level, needs. It might be a safeguard to put your nuclear readiness or your nuclear forces on a higher force direction or force, level of alert. You might hear some EAMs for that if it's a touchy country, but I would wager $100 in a steak dinner that if we were to, somebody gets a burr up their ass and decides that they're going to invade, the United States Navy is going to commence, and Marines are going to commence a operation to invade some little Pacific nation that has no ties to major players and just take it over. I would bet you $100 in a steak dinner no one's going to even bother to phone anyone at STRATCOM for that. If the civilian side and the Joint Chiefs determine no near-peer or nuclear-armed adversary is going to get their feathers ruffled over that, there's no point in calling them. Does that make sense? Okay, hopefully that answers your question. I think Ramjet asked that originally. Heather was pressure washing. You don't have to apologize to me for pressure washing. Pressure wash that shit. Pressure wash the shit out of that stuff, whatever you're doing. Okay, Mr. Sapphire. Mr. Sapphire's Rock County asks, I was always told only worry about 3 and 4 character messages. Well, you can worry or worry not. Typically, the 3 and 4 character groupings are associated with the message strings of already high priority communications like Skymasters. So, you're in 3 and 4, groups of 3 messages in a group of 4. I'm probably spitting that out wrong. Or 4 messages in groups of 3. As follows: Skymaster, 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 and then you're dealing with 12 characters overall. 3 groups of 4 characters, things like that. You're in that dreaded range, but you're only there because you're already listening in on a very high priority command structure in the NC3 system. For the HF system, it's Skymaster, because that's controls all airborne assets. So yeah, if you hear that, there's something very high level going on, and it might be training, it might be real world, it might be very high profile show of force projection. Like if we were to, there's some speculation, some evidence that previous Skymasters were called, like back in the old SAC days, whenever they ran either intimidation missions up against the Soviet border or overflights like the Oxcart, now known as SR-71 Blackbird missions, or U-2 missions, I'm sorry, not SR-71. SR-71 was from the Oxcart program. But U-2 missions, things, high profile, provocative stuff might have been associated in the past with that. Okay, see if there's any other question. Hopefully that answers that one. How often are testing, Tracy White asks, how often are testing or fake EAMs set out? Now, here's where a whole bunch of the Disney Wow Factor, OSINT Bro creators really don't like to hear this. In any cryptography for psychological operations, right? You have one-time pad, which means only the sender and receiver know the combination to unlock the digits, basically. In that level of cryptography, it's unbreakable, and everyone knows it's unbreakable. You're not going to break that unless you get the time-dependent key for that transmission or for that character string. Okay? So virtually unbreakable. Psychological operations understands that monitoring your enemy's pattern of life and communications has a PSYOP value. That means, in conventional reasoning, an EAM can be transmitted for no other purpose other than strictly psychological operations. Hey, we are here, we are active, we are babbling about big boom booms. Oh my gosh. So you can have heavy flow EAM days, and every EAM is fake, or what's called a null. Strictly for psychological operations. That is a possibility built into cryptography. People don't like it, okay? The ones that are showing you EAMs for the purposes of making a Disney movie out of it, to keep your attention and to keep you on edge, keep you on the edge of your seat. They are not going to admit or tell you of that possibility. That is a good question, Tracy. It's often disregarded, even by your most serious OSINT bros or Milcom monitoring bros and gals, that document every EAM, what's the call sign, where was it heard, what frequency. They might be recording trash. They don't want to think that because that's a waste of their time. But there's a psychological reason to do that. If, let's say, little Kim, little Rocket Man, starts getting out of pocket over there on his little, finger of Asia, one thing you might do to calm him down is make it look through overt communication pathways like high-frequency radio that you are standing up your forces and you're basically, warming the rocket nozzles on all your ICBMs, because if he goes one or two more steps further, he's going to take it right in the teeth. Kapow. And Josh Kelly, I'm not talking about any one creator. I have helped dozens of creators and channels, both YouTube and Rumble and Twitch. Okay, so when you hear me saying Disney creators, I'm not talking about just one. There's many. There are some creators out there that will charge you and attempt to grift money from you for the future promise of after nuclear Armageddon communication. And anyone that has two brain cells trained in radio operation to rub together will look at that program and scream BS, because it is. There are entities like that out there. So be aware. And, unfortunately, some of these channels I no longer refuse to be associated with, because they've abused some of these ideas a little bit too much, and it rubs me the wrong way. And I tell them so, and they continue on, so I stop helping. And then their capabilities over time slowly degrade because they don't have the knowledge base to be able to keep up with it. Anyway. Yeah, everyone wants to be rich, that's for sure. All right, any other questions? Anybody else before we move on to the next segment of class? That's usually the main questions I get, They kind of fall in that same vein. What's the character count? What is it, overall, what does it mean? What could it mean? And keep in the back of your mind this whole time, HF-GCS, even though it is a small snippet of the overall communication structure, that doesn't mean you can't hear or you won't hear the beginnings of an operation to launch nuclear weapons. That is still a possibility. Unlikely, but it's a non-zero chance because it's part of the redundancy layer in strata. So, it's worth monitoring in that sense. But like I say, in 20 years of Milcom monitoring and studying the subject and becoming knowledgeable about this, because it's a segment of overall radio communications, which I am a, participant of, it's important to know what the non-zero chances are of what you're listening to, what the non-zero chances of the indications and ramifications of those signals are. Okay, another good question from Cody in Nevada -2. Are these EAMs broadcast from all station when one goes out, or are they regional? It can be all, some, both, and none. And let me see if I can quickly pull up something that will help with that without overloading my laptop here. And let me pull up a map that is on Priam, United States. Oh, I know they had a map. Come on now. Yeah, here's the map. Okay, and break that tab off and move it on over here. Okay, so here, now displayed on your screen, or should be displayed on your screen, are the ground or terrestrial installations that have major HF-GCS nodes. All right? Okay, so they're radio stations. They're not just HF radio stations, but they are very important strategic C3 and C2 nodes at these installations. Not only do they remain connected by radio, but also by the Nipper and Sipper nets, which is the DoD internet architecture. Okay, their own internet architecture that they operate. And each of these stations, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 13 major nodes have the ability to broadcast high frequency messages. All right. They're all linked by the internet, so they can all be controlled. Any, some, or all can all be controlled by another node. Typically, the node master, which is Andrews, right here in Virginia, Andrews Air Force Base, or in Maryland, I'm sorry. Proximity to the Pentagon, proximity to DC, the civilian command and control structure. Andrews is typically the main node, and what Andrews can do is engage any of these other stations to broadcast the same message. So let's say you have, okay, just as a odd off-the-wall example to highlight capability, okay, it's an extreme unlikely example, but it's there for a reason. Let's say you have a nuclear asset operating off the coast of South Africa, right? Well, you want to get word from the Joint Chiefs, right, to that asset, may be a submarine, a naval asset, maybe an airborne asset, whatever, and they're down here in South Africa, getting close to the poles, right? Well, you don't need to fire up all these other stations around the world. You just need to fire up maybe 2 of them, right? So what Andrews is, they link in, not through HF, but through maybe the NIPRNet, or maybe through a SATCOM relay, right, through the DoD satellite communication systems. That particular EAM, which is then HF broadcast by these 2 stations alone, Diego Garcia and a little island down here that's hardly ever heard, Ascension. Some of you who have monitored HF-GCS long enough have probably heard most of these stations except for Yakota. You probably heard test counts from Anderson. Very rarely do you hear Diego Garcia. Very rarely do you hear Ascension, but you do hear very frequently Offutt, Andrews, West Coast, which is McClellan Air Force Base, Elmendorf, Hickam, Joint Base Pearl, Sigonella, but you very rarely hear Yokota. You do hear Anderson often. But that's my point. You have some kind of aerial asset down here that wants to nuke the living shit out of Madagascar for whatever reason. Well, they would net in to Ascension and maybe Diego, and Diego and Ascension would then HF that out if other means weren't working. Principally SATCOM for whatever reason. So you can have an EAM that's global, meaning what one point of the node, that message has got such a level of priority, it needs to be global to all forces, and you'll have one node net in and activate all, or you might have an asset in a regional area and just do some, or you might just do a desk count and broadcast from one. Hey, am I getting my HF signal out from Anderson or Puerto Rico or Croton, right? And they want to know just in the HF layer or HF strata, can West Coast hear me? If I do a test count from the UK at such and such time with such and such atmospheric conditions, can Elmendorf or West Coast hear my HF signal? You know, they do that all the time, every day, all day. So that's kind of gets into a tactical breakdown of the HF-GCS stations, but that's their capability. So hopefully that answers that very good question. And my short-term memory has got to be shot because that was Cody in Nevada. Okay, does that answer your question, Cody? He said, thanks so much for explaining. Okay, so you answered Mike. You are psychic. You have answered my question before I have even thunk it. Super psychic. Good deal. All right, anything else before we can dive into, I got time to dive a little bit further into actual operation of the C2 and C3 network that emergency action messages are a part of. And without going through and reading to you very, very, very dry material like the Air Force Doctrine Publication 3.72 Nuclear Operations, always a fun read, always a crowd pleaser. I can walk you through this whole thing, but it's generic to the point of, just read it yourself if you're so curious, because you're not going to get any juicy deets out of these documents. You will get clues to try and search for other juicy deets, right? And what I would call indirect information gathering is about the best way to go about learning about this stuff, because one thing the Air Force is good at in their publications, or one thing the military, the U.S. military, Department of Defense is really good at, is covering their ass by citing, where certain ideas or aspects or training aspects or whatever come from, and making up impossible to remember acronyms for everything. As the number one and number two grand design of the U.S. military is to create acronyms and cite other works, so if fault comes down the command chain, it's not your fault. It was somebody else. That's what they're good at. So because of that, you can read through some of these dry publications and see other things referenced, which might lead you to the brick wall, or it might lead you to better information. And one of the one of the good things of that is you can find, for instance, if you want to try and dial down who is reading, when you say, oh, that person sounds nervous, that person is reading fast, yada, 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 which mean nothing, by the way, in the grand scheme of things. But what's true in all that is there's a human being doing this stuff. And if there's a human being in the military doing some function, that's their job, that means that there's an outline for that role. That means there's a job description for that role, which that function is described somewhere in a non-classified format. So indirect referencing and indirect research will lead you to some of these documents that will tell you more about the source subject that you want to try and figure out. So one of them is this document here from 13th of February, 2024 is the most latest one that you can get your hands on in the private space, on the interwebs itself. And as to job description, career field education and training plan for a U.S. Air Force radio operator, all the way up to the superintendent of a command node is listed in this document. And some of the things that he might be doing, what he's got to do. So let's look at the responsibilities of this Air Force job description. Okay, if I didn't pass it up already. Blah, 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 teamwork and all that kind of good stuff that military loves. So specialty summary, specialty description. Now we're kind of getting warmer. Duties and responsibilities, 7.2 dot. What does this tell us? So the duties and responsibilities of this particular job, which would be a radio man that's going to pass EAMs or have other, job functions in coordination with an emergency action message. Performs C3 actions to support interesting homeland security, national defense, air and space force operations. Provides C3 of worldwide nuclear and conventional forces supporting emergency plans, mission type orders, and operation plans. Supports joint force operations and JADO through execution of acronym CJADC2, which we can go to the bottom of the pamphlet and look that up. Facilitates C3 in support of installation emergency management programs, coordinate actions, yada, yada, yada. But you can go through this whole description of what a radio man does at the C3 or C2 level, and it will give you hints on what the messages are supposed to do. Again, it's going to be worded in a way, right, where it's not going to give away any of the secret sauce from the military side of things, but it'll tell you maintain proficiency in all C2, CJADC2 systems and aircraft flight following mission management systems, establishes manpower, communications, equipment, facility requirements. So this job description or this skill, right, has different levels, 3, 5, 7, and 9, all the way from the apprentice, who is going to be a radio man's assistant, basically, all the way down to a superintendent, which would be in control of a command point or command station receiving an EAM or maybe transmitting an EAM. So yeah, it's a lot of information there. I do recommend some self-study with some of this stuff. Let's see if we can find what I don't remember that particular acronym off the top of my head, what they were talking about earlier. Go back up here to duties and responsibilities. That's probably Joint Air Domain Operations and Command of Joint Air Domain command and control, if I would guess. Let's see. Copy text, search, survey says. Was only mentioned 4 times in this document. Yeah. Joint operations and doctrine, and C2 operations for assigned forces. So I was close. Joint all-domain operations, JADO, and yeah, so I was pretty close. When's the Boogaloo? I have no clue what you're talking about there, bub. All right, we got an EAM going right now. Let's listen to it together.
3, Charlie, 7, Lima.
Crap. My bad.
6, Victor,
Scrolled on the wrong. Scrolled out. Scroller.
Tango, Echo, Yankee, Juliet, Again, 3,
3.
Golf,
Golf.
Victor,
Victor. 6.
Zulu,
Zulu.
November,
November. Oscar.
3, Echo, Omaha,
The first 6 are the station prefix or unit.
Foxtrot, Mike, 3, Charlie, 7, Lima, X-ray, Romeo, November, 6, Echo, 2, X-ray, Tango, Echo, Yankee, Juliet.
Sound like a baby crying in the background if you heard that.
More to follow. Stand by.
More to follow just simply means there's another message from the station.
Golf, Charlie, Kilo, Oscar, 2, stand by. 3, Golf, Charlie, Kilo, Oscar, 2, stand by. 3, Golf, Charlie,
Yeah, he could be working from home.
Oscar, 2,
Somebody shut Junior up. I'm about ready to launch something.
3, Golf, Charlie, Kilo, Oscar, 2, Whiskey, Quebec,
I've heard dogs barking in the background.
Whiskey,
I've heard what sounded like plates being dropped before.
2, Papa, Romeo,
So I've wondered sometime
5,
if some of these, if this particular, not MOS is the wrong word, but job description in the Air Force.
Echo,
How did I get onto that document?
Sierra, 4,
I wonder if you can work from home.
Juliet, 7, Whiskey, Isaac, 3, Golf, Charlie,
Yeah, I've heard screaming.
Oscar,
I'm with you, Ramjet. Sounds like you've been listening for a while too.
Quebec, 3,
Now, I will say there's one incident, and it happened on the NYP channel
3,
in the early
2,
early time where I was starting to help Greg. Greg had wanted his own HF station, so I was working on that project with him. And that was that night has yet to be repeated in.
Sierra,
I've never heard a night like that, and that was what many know and refer to as culinary night.
Whiskey,
I was in the background helping Greg that night keep track of the transmissions and forces. And in over 20 years of doing Milcom listening and being interested in the subject and researching it, I've never encountered that. That was definitely a good example of a live fire mission that was canceled at the very end. So, you know, everything that happened in sequence, all the radio transmissions that we intercepted that night and listened to were determined about halfway through the event, as real world and verified by their own radio men. And I have never heard a sequence of that type before in my life. So whatever went down that night, we were very, very close to discharging or releasing nuclear weapons. I have no doubt in my mind. Now, who the actors were in all of that, other than U.S. Air Force in the United States, what other countries was the going to be the recipient of that operation, remains a mystery. We can only speculate on who that would have been. But yeah, that was a real one, crew. I think he's still got his side of the transmissions. What made it really difficult that night was I was listening to about 5 or 6 different frequencies and stations, and he was trying to keep up with the capability that he had at the time. But between the both of us, we pretty much were able to document and broadcast the entire event with probably 85 to 90% of the messages being heard by the audience. You can live the rest of your life and hopefully never hear anything like that again. I really don't want to. But, and Culinary Night by itself is a good reason alone to monitor this stuff, because you never know what you're going to hear. Not just on primary channels, but also on secondaries. There's lots of frequencies that are considered, under HF-GCS. So that was before Iran. That was before any major tension in the Persian Gulf area. That was like 2 years ago, I think, by now. I want to say it was like 2 years ago. So my guess is either Russia or China. But I think you can still go back and listen to that broadcast on his Rumble page. Maria Jaden, yeah, something. They weren't going through all that for practice, because you could hear it in the transmissions that were captured. They freaked the living fuck out of operators at Sigonella when they handed over from. They handed command over, relay command over from Puerto Rico to Lajes, from Lajes to Sigonella, and by the time the bomber squadron or aircraft that were operating in the command nodes that were operating over the radio got to Sigonella, they caught Sigonella by complete surprise, the operators there. There were people crying in the background. There were people screaming, "Oh my God." There were people, the radio operators at Sigonella, which are professional military radio operators, were asking multiple times for confirmation that this is real world. Yeah, Ramjet remembers that night pretty vividly. So there was upper level procedures performed, authentication and arming, and in some of the radio transmissions you could hear the audio of the klaxon alarms in the background as they were arming nuclear weapons, and the weapon systems were alerting them that you're arming nuclear weapons. So it was as real could be, and I wonder to this day if there was not some kind of SATCOM problem that allowed the HF strata layer to broadcast and handle most of those transmissions, because that's not something you're supposed to really hear in open air, at the level that it was taking place. So I wonder if, there was some kind of satellite issue at the time, whether it was electronic warfare by the pier that we were getting ready to release on, or what it was. But, I would say under normal operating procedures, that traffic would have only been over secure SATCOM and never would have been HF under normal circumstances. And because it wasn't normal circumstances or out of SOP some way, it caught the radio operators at Sigonella by surprise like it did. Yeah, and FOIA requests for military activities that night have been ignored, unanswered. I've tried to get more information on it. So it was a night of nights. I didn't get any sleep that night, that was for sure, because not only from the activity of keeping up with everything and trying to monitor it and helping out with that particular channel at the time, it was nerve-wracking to hear that was going on, because I understood what it meant. So, that alone, Tracy White, is why you listen and why you monitor. Do you have to freak out about everything? No, but the level of communications on quote-unquote culinary night was at a level far beyond a busy, heavy flow EAM day or a heavy more to follow day. So, yeah, never know what you're going to hear. Yeah, and whether they were going to use the nuke for an EMP or a ground blast, I have no clue. All I know is nukes were being armed in real time, and we were listening to it. And all the aircraft systems that you would expect to hear for, a couple different airframes were also heard prior to the release of. But crazy times. That was a crazy night. Yeah, it could have been satellite jamming that night. It could have been a ramp up, and one of the first things that would be done, looking at opposing, opposing force operation is. Let me try and get some of this static knocked out here, squelched out. But one of the first things that an opposing nuclear power would try and do before an attack, or if they felt an attack was imminent, was to take out SATCOM. So, yeah, so that's one of the first steps that you would take, and maybe that was through EM jamming of satellite communications. Maybe that's why that particular layer of HF was activated that night, and a lot of the communications were now hearable. So could it be? There's plenty of speculation that surrounds that night too. So yeah, there is always more going on, and that goes back to, you can't quite pin down what's in the news, because from a psychological operation standpoint, a lot of your news is psyops. Things happen without the presence. And it's common sense, it's common sense to know and say, but I think a lot of people get lost in the excitement if they're a news junkie, or they like to, they not news junkie in a derogatory way, but just someone that likes to keep up with all the happenings and really pays attention to geopolitical events and news around the world and stuff like that. Is things obviously happen, the event comes and goes outside the view or coverage area of a reporter or a news camera or whatever. And there's many nights where millions of people are asleep in their beds, or, going about, work and taking Johnny to soccer practice, and in some military installation somewhere, that same period of time is looking like leading up to Armageddon, because something is happening in their domain, that they have to either defend or, they monitor or whatever. Yeah, I mean, you're never going to know all of it. Big club information. OSINT and the OSINT bros try to do a good job, but you saw how the effectiveness of OSINT bros were completely clipped in the nuts the second the U.S. administration leaned on all the private commercial companies to shut down satellite imagery over the operating area of Iran and the Gulf Coast countries. It's like, you're not necessarily going to be privy to that same level of information all the time. They're gonna induce the fog of war over it, especially if it goes against the narrative that they're trying to paint. So it makes me think often. So many events are in the public sphere. Maybe not general public knowledge, of course, but anyone that follows, Cold War happenings, nuclear triads, military subjects, we can all probably think of a couple instances, and I can think of one for sure. Like on the Soviet side, there is a Soviet officer that we all owe our either lives or existence to, that probably had to retire, in poverty, without hardly any recognition, because he stopped, a Soviet nuclear launch. Let's see if I can pull that guy up. Who shall I ask? Maybe I'll ask El Graco again. But I'll tell you this guy's story, and it's very interesting to me, because obviously he doesn't get the credit that he's deserving of, because it was a failure of a state system, a classified Soviet state system that caused the whole debacle in the first place. That refused to launch. Let's see. Oh, come on, El Graco. Cure my... Okay. Tear that off. Drag it over here. Yeah, I guess I can put it up there. There's two prominent Soviet officers credited with preventing potential nuclear launches against the U.S. or its forces during the Cold War. Stanislav Petrov, that's the guy I was thinking of in 1983, and Vasily Arkhipov, 1962, both showed extraordinary judgment under pressure. Stanislav Petrov died in 2017. Turn the radio volume down because the static's starting to bother me. If it's bothering me, it's bothering you. So he was the duty officer at Serpukhov 15 Command Center near Moscow, monitoring the Oko satellite early warning system. The system reported that the U.S. had launched 5 ICBMs toward the Soviet Union, and protocol required him to report the attack immediately to superiors, which would almost certainly have triggered a Soviet retaliatory nuclear strike. Petrov reasoned it was likely a false alarm. A full U.S. first strike would involve hundreds or thousands of missiles, not just 5. The system had known reliability issues, and it was a time of heightened tensions shortly after the Soviets shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007. He reported it as a malfunction instead of an attack, and later investigation confirmed it was indeed a false positive caused by sunlight reflecting off of high-altitude clouds. His decision disobeyed military protocol and is credited with averting a catastrophic nuclear exchange. He received no major reward at the time, and actually some reprimands for paperwork, but was later honored internationally. He passed away in 2017. And the other guy is a Cuban Missile Crisis hero. Just it's stuff like that you will not hear about until years and years later, and you actually owe your lives to this dude, or your lives would have had a significantly different trajectory path if it was not for their actions. And, this kind of crap is happening to this day just because we have, increasingly thicker and thicker layers of technology, there's still humans involved. There's still egos involved. There's still people making judgment calls. So this kind of stuff, I guarantee you, without a shadow of a doubt, just because of the human condition and human nature, is likely still happening to this day. But maybe we won't know about it in our lifetime. Maybe our kids will read about it. Who knows? Or maybe it'll be buried forever. We just don't know. So, yeah, it's an endless number of interesting history and stories. Yeah, now we have AI involved, which, yeah, that's the, it reminds me of the meme where you've got The Matrix, the Terminator movies, and what else is the other one? I don't remember, but basically it's a Venn diagram with "you are here" in the middle. And it's like Terminator, The Matrix, and the other one. And I don't remember the other one. Oh, Idiocracy. Yeah, it's the movie Idiocracy, The Matrix, and the Terminator, and they're Venn diagrammed with three bubbles, and "you are here" in the middle where they all overlap. So, President Muchacho decides he wants to nuke the crap out of Madagascar because he didn't compliment his hair that day. And he just tells AI, he just tells Alexa to do it. Alexa, nuke Madagascar. I'm tired of their shit. That's where you're at, crew. But anyway, I hope this was an interesting subject matter for you. I hope I presented it in a somewhat reasonable way where you could understand it, and that you had some fun, that you learned some things, this, that, and the other. Got a fairly strong EAM coming into the East Coast. Let's see what they're blabbing about for the time being. And we might shut her down pretty soon if I don't get a whole bunch more questions. So, yeah, President Trumpaccio.
Victor, Alpha, Q, November, uniform, 4, uniform, 4, Kilo, 4, Oscar, Kilo, 5, Tango, 7, 2, Charlie, uniform, Delta, 4, November, Tango, Hotel, I say it again, 3, Golf, Charlie, 7, X-ray, Juliet, Victor, Alpha, 2, November, uniform, 4, uniform, 4, Kilo, 4, Oscar, Kilo, 5, Tango, 7, 2, Charlie, uniform, Delta, 4, November, Tango, Hotel, this is sellout, out.
Okay, bands are starting to get a little bit noisy. All right. You're welcome, Mary. Love being part of the solo crew. I love having you here. Okay, it was really educational. Thank you. They're ordering Whataburger. Yeah, you never know. How noisy the bands are getting. But, crew, that's class for today. If there's no other questions here shortly received in the old chat box, we'll dismiss class and you go dig out your Lunchables and your Kool-Aid and you go have recess in the sunshine if you got sunshine. Or as also said, sometimes it's last call. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So I got a few minutes before I got to shut her down. So hopefully everyone enjoyed that, learned a little something, chuckled a little bit. That's the goal. You're welcome, Pinoy. Got bad storms your way, Tracy? I hope they're not as bad as what Effingham County here in my home state got. Those people got tore up pretty bad last night. Pretty strong naders running around on the ground. Thank you, Joel. Thanks for the kind words. You're welcome, Ed Shue. Yeah, and we can do topics like this again. We can dive deeper into what's known about actual equipment or things of that nature. But I pretty much tried to do a top-down level understanding of what EAMs and demystify them, take away the magic Disney ooh and ah element a little bit, because they are based in a real world doctrine of command, control, and cryptographic method and things like that. So, yep, go touch grass now, Ramjet. That's better for you than listening to me or listening to the radio all day. Get some sunshine and get a little outside time if it's nice. Learned a lot today, good. All right, let's one more time. Let's see what this guy's yakking about, if it's anything important.
3.
You'll hear a lot of repeats also if you listen to
Charlie. 7.
what kind of name is Effingham? Yeah, it's just the name of the county and the city up north there, and Illinois is.
Charlie. 7. X-ray. Stand 3. Go. Charlie. 7. X-ray. Stand. Message followed.
Yeah, so here's a little listening trick. If you don't hear them come out and say directly, message of X number of characters, you can pretty much bet it's going to be a standard 30 count, standard format 30 count message. Sometimes they will sneak in a 22 or 24 character without announcing the character count. But most of the time, if it's an atypical message, if it's an atypical count message, like a 48, a 126, a 17, whatever, they'll say message of, for example, 24 characters follows. And what they're doing is they're allowing that operator that's receiving the EAM, that extra second, to flip over to the non-typical pages in his binder or tab on his terminal. Like we have Windows tabs. I'm certain they have input tabs the same on these terminals that I was speaking about earlier. So, messages can be of almost any length. You have to listen to them to really dive into how to separate them out. But this message could be anything from, putting a wing level force, on alert, force direction, installation alert status. An officer with more than 1 star wants a sandwich. I mean, you don't know. It's classified. It could be almost anything. I doubt this is a launch order. More likely to be, and that's where the sandwich comes from. Is it's kind of an inside joke with another creator that's no longer really in the monitoring space, but he would ask about that, and I would say it's more likely to be a lunch order than a launch order. Just being funny. So, not true, really. I'm sure there's an importance, and it affects military personnel in some way, in some fashion. But as far as the civilian observer or channel creator, as far as priority goes, it's more than likely has more to do with lunch than a launch. But all right, class dismissed. You're on recess. The bell has rung. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being here. We're at 2 hours, 21 minutes. EAM's still going. Ramjet Ramjet, you're keeping everyone after class, bud. All right. We'll answer this one. So, do corrections disregard mean they effed up their own readout or new or changed correspondent from higher up? It can be both. If you've listened long enough, you can run across times where the operator has obviously had some kind of trouble, lost their place entirely, is screwing up, pronouncing characters. There's new green trainees that come into these roles as well, and then you'll hear the disregard because the station commander has said, "Hey, that's enough effing up," and they'll hand it to another operator, and they'll read the message. So it can also mean a adjacent or higher priority order has reached the hands or ears or eyes of the C2 node commander, and the message going out is superseded, so it's halted and disregarded, and then the process starts over again where they read off the supersession message. So yeah, all and above can be true. That's pretty obviously known in any procedure. So, all right. So, Ramjet, you go outside now. So, have a fun recess, everybody. I'll catch you back here at a later date. But I hope you have a good evening and take care of one another, love one another, because you never know when the sun might set in your backyard with all this human nonsense that we carry on to do and insist on having. So, good night, crew, at 2 hours, 23 minutes, and 20, let's just call it 30 seconds. Nighty-night.